Hello, mosh pit masters and chronic alcoholics. This installment of Bastardized History will be taking a look at one of the cornerstones of extreme metal. Born in the 80s only to have its carcass dragged well into the 2010s, ladies and gentlemen, thrash metal. Now, I have been heard to say in the past that thrash is trash, baby, and while I am of the opinion that straight thrash tends to be boring, that is not to say that thrash should be disregarded altogether. Thrash metal was introduced to the world very early on relative to metal in general, but as with most musical evolutions, there is no concrete birth date for thrash. If there was such a thing, I'm sure we would be seeing a half-assed editorial from clickbait metal blogs on a yearly basis. But despite the absence of a particular date, I can tell you with certainty that 1983 was one of the most important years. It saw the release of Star Wars: Return of the Jedi as well as national availability of the Chicken McNugget. But 1983 was also important for thrash metal. You see, there were hints of thrash cropping up all over the underground, but it wasn't until this year that we got Metallica's Hammer Smashed Face, Slayer's new wave of British heavy metal but faster, Exodus's Die by His Hand, and Overkill's Power in Black. This was also when the band Suicidal Tendencies released the album Suicidal Tendencies, which then went on to release the EP Suicidal Tendencies, which released the single Suicidal Tendencies, which disappointed and depressed fans so much that the word suicidal physically manifested above their heads and announced to the world their condition. But all that still begs the question, what is thrash metal? As I touched upon with Slayer, it's really just the natural musical progression from the new wave of British heavy metal, the missing link between classic heavy metal and the harder variety. Black Sabbath laid the overall foundation, Iron Maiden, Venom, and Judas Priest made it faster and more intense, and thrash metal one-upped even them by increasing the speed further, writing more aggressive riffs and lyrics, and shouting instead of singing. It's important to note that these thrash vocals were not, in fact, death growls. Early thrash may use harsh vocals in a comparative sense, but they are very much influenced by punk music. Sesame Street had not yet exploded in popularity at this point in time, so the Cookie Monster vocal style wasn't even considered. The thrashing actually comes in when the riffs get so intense and percussive even, that it calls to mind a dying fish slapping into the ground as violently as it possibly can. We're not talking about breakdowns here, folks, or chugging, or anything of that nature. This is just good old-fashioned shredding at its finest. There is a popular, albeit heavily commercialized, grouping of thrash bands known as the Big Four. This consists of Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax. And as the name suggests, these are the largest groups in the subgenre, both in terms of popularity and their physical appearance. Recent studies speculate that Kerry King may have stood at a towering 28 feet tall in his prime. That's almost big enough to match his ego, am I right, people? America had many other notable thrash bands in the early days, such as Testament, Eggs R Us, Overkill, and Death Angel, all of which are more deserving of being in the Big Four than Anthrax, because Anthrax is an embarrassment to all creation. Now, believe it or not, the history of the American thrash scene consists of more than just down-tuned punk riffs and Hispanic Americans vomiting on the floor. There was also some drama. You see, Dave Mustaine of Megadeth fame was originally a guitarist and key songwriter for Metallica. Or, if you're a 50-year-old man in a sweat-drenched wife-beater trying to sound cool when discussing the 5 metal bands you actually know, Mustaine used to shred it up with Metallica before death got our heads banging. Anyway, Dave was kicked out of the band very early in their career due to his rampant alcoholism. He reportedly harassed the other musicians, was prone to violent outbursts, and at his worst, agreed to appear on the cartoon Duck Dodgers. Lars Ulrich was furious when he found out. He screamed, "What is going on? I thought ducks cannot breathe in space. What is going on?" and threw himself out of a third-story window in a fit of rage. He shattered both of his arms and completely lost his ability to drum, but the rest of Metallica couldn't bring themselves to fire him. His crippling disability can now be heard on every Metallica release to date. As for Dave Mustaine, he did in fact leave and go on to form Megadeth, which, come here, kid. Which was marginally better than Metallica, but don't tell anybody that I said that. Not to be outdone by America, except for in major wars and gross domestic product, Germany had their own quartet of thrash bands. While Slayer is the only American Big Four band that I would consider proto-black, Germany was all over this evil sound. The German Big Four, more commonly known as the Teutonic Big Four, consists of Sodom, Creator, Tankard, and Destruction. Those 4 band names are a good representation of what you'll find in German thrash because they include a single biblical reference and a reference to drinking, which is mostly what you're going to get from that scene. Maybe some Vietnam War references if you behave yourself, but we'll see how that goes. Brazil was a quality supplier of thrash metal in the 80s, and many of the bands from Brazil were keen on extremity. This is where that sweet, sweet proto-black element comes back into play, sweethearts, including the world-famous INRI by Sarcófago, which is the Portuguese name for Sacagawea. She was a Native American that assisted Lewis and Clark in the exploration of the newly acquired Louisiana territory, but after that was all said and done, she was able to offer her wisdom to the Portuguese colonialists in South America. She made sure that only the most noble and effective Portuguese could come in, famously stating, "If you are a false, don't entry, because you'll be burned and died. The nuclear drums will crush your brain, slaughtering all with intensive pain." No one quite knew what the hell she meant at the time, but by the 1980s, Sarcófago honored her by using that quote in their song Death Thrash. Other acts like Holocausto, Mutilator, Sepultura, and Chicka Chicka Slim Shady did her proud by playing some of the roughest and toughest thrash on the planet at the time. Most of the classic thrash bands are unique in the sense that they were able to age like a fine wine. And when I say age like a fine wine, I mean rot like grapes left in a hot swamp, because Jesus Christ, I cannot even put into words how far the mighty have fallen here. Thrash is like punk in the sense that it thrives on youth, and once you pass your youth, your project stagnates and ceases to improve. It's up to the newcomers to save thrash, it seems. But unfortunately, the bulk of the newcomers are re-thrashers or pizza thrashers that think fun is an excuse for mediocrity. What the young blood doesn't seem to get is that you can be an absolutely unapologetic lunatic and still make good music. Look at X-Slasher. They have a song called Mark of the Pizzagram, which, title-wise, is eye-rollingly stupid and may make me want to rip my own throat out, but the music is really good, so it doesn't matter. It does matter when the music has nothing to offer, though. I'm not going to name any names, Lich King, but generally straight thrash is not something worth keeping up with anymore. Now, Thrash Fusion, on the other hand, is the belle of the ball. You like black metal, kid? Bam. Here's black thrash in the form of Sabbath, Melekesh, Widower, and Brazier. Or are you more of a death metal fan like myself? Well, say hello to Coffin Dust, Ripping Corpse, and Ex Mortis. Do you like progressive metal? Then I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Thrash is best utilized as an extreme metal enhancer these days. The straight thrash torch is being carried by Toxic Holocaust, Havoc, and Municipal Waste, among other acts, and despite these three having some killer releases respectively, I don't think we'll ever get that sweet, sweet newborn thrash from the 80s when they were still trying to figure out what the hell it was. In conclusion, thrash is trash, baby.